We have a short section here, really a table on clinical trials related to drug development and testing. Of course, there are multiple phases of clinical trials, but prior to starting those phases, you undergo preclinical testing with a drug. The preclinical testing here involves 2 different animal species. And the purpose of those preclinical tests, just really safety and to test the biologic activity of the drug prior to trying this out in humans in actual clinical trials. Of course, the rule here is that we try to develop very good animal models for disease. And if you can develop a good animal model for disease, many times we are able to develop very effective drugs for those types of diseases. Of course, we still have a lot of work to do in that area. But once a drug goes into clinical trial, it goes through a series of phases, 1, 2, 3, and 4. In phase 1 clinical trials, a couple of things to notice here. First of all, it's a small number of people, usually around 50. These are healthy volunteers. Notice these are not people with the disease. And importantly, the question that you're trying to answer in phase 1 is the drug safe? It's important to point that out because I would imagine that most folks, the first thing you want to know about a drug in a clinical trial is, does the drug work? And that's not the question that we're going to answer in phase 1. Phase 1, we have to decide on a safe amount of the drug to take. So it's really safety and dosage that we're determining in phase 1 in healthy volunteers. And really, any healthy individual could potentially sign up for this phase of clinical trials. Now, phase 2. Phase 2 is the phase where patients with the disease are first treated with the drug most often. Now it's just a couple of hundred people that are involved. So a few more people are getting involved, and these are people with the disease. In phase 2, now is the time that we ask about the effectiveness of the drug. So in phase 2, the question is, does the drug work? Most often, it turns out, drugs that enter phase 2 trials, the answer to the question, does it work? The answer to that is no. Okay? Many times drugs are going to fail in phase 2 trials, most commonly. However, if the answer is yes, if the drug is effective, we can then move on into phase 3. Now, phase 3 is a much more extensive and therefore much more expensive undertaking. Notice that now we're dealing with a few thousand patients. Most often phase 3 is done in exactly the same setting as what the drug is going to be used in. For example, if it's in a hospital setting or if it's in an outpatient setting, that's almost always how a phase 3 trial is designed. And it's designed to test further the effectiveness of the drug as well as common side effects. So again, we get a lot of good information from phase 3 trials, really kind of honing what we know about the drug, preparing it now to go out onto the market. Once phase 3 is completed, the drug company then is going to apply for a new drug application with the FDA. Once that review is completed and the FDA approves the drug then goes out onto the market. And that's when we start phase 4, which is a post-marketing surveillance program, again, after FDA approval. Phase 4 is actually where physicians can most often get involved in clinical trials because essentially you become data collectors for this particular drug for several years after it's released. Certainly in phase 4, we get data on common side effects, much more than what we get from phase 3 because now many more people are taking the drug in phase 4. In fact, if the drug company is very fortunate, millions of people, in fact, will be taking this drug. So lots of potential for data in phase 4. But I also want to point out that in phase 4, you can discover some rare side effects of drugs. And a good story related to this is the story of the COX-2 inhibitors. You remember that when the COX-2 inhibitors first came out, they were very, very popular. The drug celecoxib, very, very popular. And of course, once that drug made it onto the market, after some years, it and its relatives like rofecoxib and valdecoxib, we discovered some cardiovascular events, heart attacks and strokes, leading to death in some of those cases. And that, of course, led to some of those drugs being pulled off the market. That was really discovered during the post-marketing surveillance part of their clinical trial. Finally, we have the teratogenicity categories, drugs in pregnancy. Remember that the categories here, A, B, C, D, and X. Of course, these categories are really based on safety in pregnancy. And of course, category A is considered the safest with no risk. Okay? Very few drugs fall into this category. For example, folic acid would be an example of something that fits into Category A. Category B, while we may have had some data on animal studies that indicates a risk, we've not had any data really in humans indicating a risk. So Category B drugs are considered pretty safe in pregnancy. Category C is really the unknown category, because we may have some data from animals, but most often we have no data from humans, and therefore drugs that fit into Category C fall into kind of the unknown category. We don't really know if they're safe or not. We don't have the data yet. Category D and Category X have both been shown to be teratogenic. There is definite harm to the fetus from a Category D or a Category X drug. Importantly, though, the difference in terms of prescribing is that you might actually prescribe a Category D drug. You would do that if the benefits outweigh the risk. And an example of that might be an anticonvulsant that the mother may be taking because it's the only anticonvulsant that works effectively on her type of seizure, and you may continue that drug despite its known teratogenic effects because of the benefit to the mother. However, Category X, absolute contraindication. If the woman becomes pregnant while on a Category X drug, the rule is to immediately discontinue that drug and perhaps look for an alternative.